to Rocket with Chief. Conversations take you places. My name's Daniel and I'm your host. And today I may just fan out because we've got Gigi Alcock in the house. It's not about the corporate. Gigi, I'm not going to go into your full CV. However, let's just say you've done a lot. You're an entrepreneur, an activist, an author of 3 books, an adventure traveler, a strategy advisor, a speaker, problem solver. You pack the day. I don't know when you get to sleep. It's probably why you've got no hair. Before we dive into your world and an intro, what's your perfect breakfast routine and what did you eat this morning in Kyalami?
My perfect routine is generally I take my dogs for a run around Kyalami.
Oh, stunning.
I've got border collies that desperately want to be run as much as possible, and then my primary breakfast is coffee. Lots of coffee, and it doesn't stop until midnight.
We share that. So border collies, because that harkens back to your days as a cattle herder, or just because you love the black and whites?
I love my motorbikes, but I have a wife and kids who are into horses and dogs. So I'm the adopted parent.
Oh, that's amazing. Gigi, for our audience who don't know you, just give us a 2-minute summary before I start asking some questions. Who are you and why are you here?
Yeah, so long story short, I grew up in a mud hut in a Zulu village in a very poor part of Zululand called Msinga. My parents were political activists and community workers and built a mud hut and brought us up there. We washed in the river. My mother taught us at home. We grew up very much like the local Zulu kids, as poor as them, and literally hunted in the hills and did lots of stick fighting and herded goats and cattle, and yeah, that's how we grew up. And then from there I basically initially started as a political activist with then UDF, and kind of realized there was no glory in poverty. So it became I moved to Johannesburg. They call it in Msinga Gwandonga Duma, which means the place where the walls thunder, and I moved to Joburg and basically became a capitalist and entered the world of primarily marketing into the township space. So I've spent the last 20 odd years in various formats. I started a business and sold a business that became the kind of primary business focusing on the mass market, and then in the process wrote 3 books, Third World Child, White Born Zulu Bred, about growing up in a Zulu village, and then Gasinomics and Gasinomic Revolution, which were 2 business books which were in essence kind of really established the concept of the informal market as an economic as a very dynamic economic sector. And today I think a huge amount of people are focusing on that sector, which when I started was ignored and considered to be small. So yeah, so that's my and today I'm kind of a consultant. I've also invested in a number of township or businesses focusing on the townships or based within townships, and yeah.
It actually gives me goosebumps, the journey that you've gone through, you and your brother and your family. You say you were poor, you gloss over that quite easily. How did you break that cycle of poverty? I mean, what gives you that you've got brothers and friends that you left behind that are still in the same place? What gives it one the difference to end up in Kyalami and the other one to stay in the rural area? Why does that happen?
When I was relatively young, I said to my father, "Will you send me to university?" And he said, I'll never afford to, but I'll bring you up prepared for life in Africa. And, so in essence, the skills that we learned, or I learned, and that my father brought us up with, prepared both my brother and I for this life in Africa. And my mother was a journalist and invested a lot of time in teaching us at home. So we ended up with a fairly basic. I mean, I have a matric, and that's it. But I think it was the understanding of this part of Africa. Then and the education. Obviously, my mother instilled in us a lot of reading. Both my mother and father got us reading really early, and so we're both voracious readers and continue to do that. And I think that gives you what maybe a tertiary education doesn't give you, in terms of knowledge of the world and stuff, and
curiosity.
And absolutely. And then a fair amount of luck. I mean, it was the only space that I kind of felt qualified to operate in. And the first job I got the first job I had in Johannesburg was a bricklayer.
No ways.
Yeah, I was a bricklayer for a year, doing renovations in Jeppe and in the south, and so that's my primary qualification, actually. And then I was spending a lot of time in the kind of hostels and the townships, and that was around about 1990, 91, and it was quite a rough time in the townships, and
I was in the townships at the same time, but I think for different reasons. Do you know, I was in the hostels
exactly.
at that time as well.
Yeah, so exactly. And I mean, so I mean, to kind of rewind, I was in the military in the infantry in 1980, 85, 86, and I refused to do township duty. I loved the army, but I refused to do township duty. Ended up in various amounts of trouble, and eventually was moved to military intelligence because I could speak Zulu, and then did nothing for a year, basically. So I kind of knew the military side of things quite well, and now I was on the opposite side of the kind of the spectrum, and I was living with a friend in Yeovil, and at the time there was all of these international journalists had come to the country, and my second job was these journalists were like, I'd meet these journalists from the Washington Post or whatever it might be, and they needed to get access to the townships to get sources and write stories, and they offered me a job as a kind of fixer, driver, whatever, a translator. They paid me like $250 a day, which for me was a fortune.
What?
I think the
drinks
dollar
are on Gigi. Drinks were on you. Gee whiz.
Well, I was earning 1,000 Rand a month as a bricklayer. And then suddenly I was offered $250 a day, which was about 1.5 Rand to a dollar back then. I think so it was like, call it 300-400 Rand a day, and suddenly and I could make up in a week I could make my monthly salary. And that kind of got me into where I ended up then in a business called Group Africa, which is one of the first businesses that did promotions and activations in the townships. And even there I started as a rep. I was given a Nissan 1400 Bakkie and sent into the townships to work with schools and so on. So and then I eventually actually bought out a division of that company, and the rest is kind of history.
Wow.
So but so when I say luck, you meet these people, and along the way, as I was there, I was the bricklayer, and next thing I was a translator, and when I realized with the journalists, I was like, suddenly, hey, there's a need for the skills I have, and those skills were in essence ability to communicate and the ability to access a world which other people saw as foreign and with barriers to entry. And for me, I was like this chameleon. I could move between a black and a white world, or a Zulu or an English world, with great ease, naturally. And that's where kind of, and when I started my marketing business, it was built on the same kind of thing, that corporates couldn't access this world, and I could access it for them.
That is such a deep insight. What are your skills and who needs access to them? I think that's a thing that not enough people understand, is that they've got value. We are beset by problems on all sides in South Africa. However, their opportunity abounds. What is your message to the youth who are coming into this market? And youth, I'm talking about men, women who are in their 20s.
Interesting. I was asked to talk at a career day at my daughter's school. She's in matric at the moment. And I spoke just after the person from UCT. And my first comment to the kids were, I shouldn't have been asked to come here, because I'm going to tell you, you don't need a varsity education.
Yeah.
And I kind of said to them, which I think is very true, stop thinking of a career, stop thinking of a journey. Because, this thing of a career is something I think that's really outdated. And there's a few people who are lucky enough to say, I'm going to be a doctor or an accountant, and they study that and they become that and they're happy and that's it. But I think the vast number of people either don't know, or they start in one area and end up in a completely different space. And when you look at it as a journey, it's really about saying, well, what's the next step, the first step? And then after that, where am I going to go? The other thing I said, is that, look around at where there is either disruption, or where there are, in essence, no kind of rules. And when I talk about disruption, if you look at the education sector, if you got into the education sector a few years ago, it really took off, because the government education system isn't working for most people. Same with health, same with the security industry. Wherever there are areas where there's disruption, and if you look at unemployment as an example, in the formal unemployment, as in jobs, the disruption is happening because people in the informal economy are going off and they're starting their own businesses and doing their own thing to make a living. And so for me, the disruption was, I'm looking at the space where there are no rules, people don't understand it, which is in essence this informal sector. There are rules, but those rules are unknown to others. So it's really about where are there spaces that are not, and the world of tech is very much that at the moment. There's a lot of disruption, a lot of changes happening, and so on. If you're wanting to build a website, you're wasting your time. But if you start looking at payment systems and social media systems and other forms of technology, those are the kind of spaces. The other thing for me is and I said the same to these kids. I said, actually look at Africa. Africa is the population is the youngest population on the planet. It's the fastest urbanizing continent in the world. But I mean, we've never seen urbanization as fast as Africa. Urbanization creates opportunities, and also being the youngest population in the world, again creates massive opportunities. It's the fastest adopter of technology on the planet. I mean, if you look at mobile payments, M-Pesa is the largest mobile payments system in East Africa and West Africa. The adoption of smartphones is like just crazy. WhatsApp is ubiquitous. So, if you go to Japan or America, you want to invest in nappies for old age people. In South Africa, in Africa, you're talking this youthful population, and so I think that there's far more, and because there's disruption, and because all of these things means that there's such a big opportunities in Africa, and if you're outside of Africa, then you've got to look at areas where there are no rules and disruption, like Elon Musk and electric cars. You've got to start finding, going into tried and trusted old things. If you want to be an entrepreneur or business person, you're either going to go and work for a corporate, or you have to start looking around at where's the areas of innovation and stuff. And I think the rest of the world outside of Africa, there's a lot less of these opportunities.
It's already been done, and the roads are paved, and they've already walked this road. So maybe before you go in there, the question is, do you or people who have followed, because you've been beating this drum for 20 years, have a seat at the boardroom table at our big corporates now? Are people saying, sure, this message is landing, and we should be changing the way we operate to meet in these sectors, or is it still falling on deaf ears?
So I think the message has certainly landed across the board, and I mean, so FNB in 2021 made a statement that the scale of the cash economy stuns FNB, and they were talking about examples of wholesalers that turn over 40 million rand a month, as an example, and these are informal wholesalers. And I made a joke on LinkedIn, I teased them on LinkedIn and said, if they'd read my book in 2013, I spoke about wholesalers turning over 350 to 400,000 rand a day in 2013. So 7-8 years later, they're like, oh wow, look here. Yeah. And I said if they'd read my book, they wouldn't have been so stunned. And then Pick n Pay made an announcement also last year saying that they were focusing their entire business now on the lower to middle income consumers, and they believe that sector is the grocery sector in that space, going to grow by about 200 billion rand a year. And they're correct, of course, but suddenly, and of course, I've done presentations to people like the execs of Pick n Pay 5-6 years ago. Suddenly in 2020, so there's been a quite a long time, but and it's not only me, but I mean, to a large extent, it's been my books, my writings, my talks and stuff like that. But there's suddenly a lot of people. There was recently an article about Mr. Price setting up container stores in KZN. So there's a whole bunch of people looking at what are the solutions. A lot of them getting it wrong, but
they're trying.
So there's this recognition and this growth suddenly of this sector, and particularly a recognition of the informal sectors kind of turnover and this kind of thing. So and that's a good thing, because as people start focusing on that sector, more opportunities rise.
Do you think there's a role for the middle class in the Kazi revolution?
Yeah. So my thing is that actually, if you look at the townships, there's been a dramatic transformation of that sector. So as an example, more than 80% of people in that space live in formal dwellings. So informal dwellings make up only 12%. So that's telling you there's been a rapid growth in terms of incomes and the type of houses people have gone from building for shelter to going for design, investing in decor and beautiful things. And the other thing is that you've seen an incredible reduction of the size of households. So 26% of households in South Africa are now single households, one-person households, and 40% are under 4 people per household. So what has in essence happened is that the vast proportion of our population, particularly in townships, has become middle class. And this is despite all the rubbish people talk about massive inequality and stuff like that. There are poor people, there is a bit of inequality, but it's overstated because our measures are often incorrect.
You speak about that. You speak about that so often. We're measuring the wrong things, and we're looking at it the wrong way. For all our audience, if you haven't read Gigi's books, you need to go and look at it, especially if you're responsible for mass market kind of ideas, and especially for you who are off continent, your measurements are wrong. Read the books. So we're talking that the middle class is here. It's here to stay, and it's making improvements.
So I think the important thing is that, you know, the role of that middle class is critical. So these are the people, you know, the middle classes shape societies throughout history and throughout the world. And you can have the issues you have in Zimbabwe because you don't have a very big middle class in a place like Zimbabwe. In South Africa, we have a very large middle class. And, you know, if you look at the township space, you know, 60+ % of that population or households are middle class households. And they're investing in their houses, they're investing in cars, they're investing in little businesses. Some recent work done by the International Finance Corporation shows that it looks at a number of years in business between formal small and medium businesses and informal small and medium businesses. And as an example, about 5% of the formal businesses have entered the business in the last, for instance, year. Versus 15% of informal businesses. So throughout, up until 6 years of being in business, there are 3 times more informal businesses entering the economy versus formal small and medium businesses. Now, I mean, and this is research from the International Finance Corporation, who's part of the World Bank and so on. Now, that means that in essence, there's 3 times more, you know, of these informal businesses entering the economy. That's the real impact on our economy, because even the president says, you know, the futures are small and medium businesses, SMMEs. And where are these businesses coming from? They're coming from these middle classes entering the space and starting these businesses. And so that is the future. That future, you know, and I called my book Gastronomic Revolution. My last business book was because there is a revolution, and the next great frontier of Africa is this. You know, and I write about this new world is a world of you know, small is the new big, and it's this multitude of small businesses doing really big things. And that is shaping our economy. It's shaping our society. It's you know, and it's unquantified because it's informal or invisible.
Now you're not a small business. Now, Mina, Nowhere Marketing, you've been around for a long time. What role is technology playing to enable you to be at all of these places, to write these books, to get these stats? What is your split between economics and or technology and contacts and face-to-faces in your day?
Look, so our business was primarily a face-to-face business, and so this is what I do. I generally see these things happening in the spaces I operate. So I spend a lot of time in townships for work, for pleasure, whatever it might be. And in that kind of process, we see trends emerging. And then, you know, and one of them, for argument's sake, is the growth of backroom rental incomes. There's 20 billion rand a year that is earned by township households for renting out their back rooms. Now, you know, then I take that figure and I go like, why would that be possible? Are there any figures that can support why would backroom rental be so big? And then you go and look at, for instance, South African General Household Survey, which is an annual survey by Stats South Africa. And in it, it shows that 26% of households are single households. Suddenly you can make that correlation and say, well, okay, if you're a single household, you don't need a big house, you need a back room, kind of small flat lit type of space to live in. So, you know, and one of the books that really shaped a lot of my thinking is a book called Factfulness. And Factfulness by a guy, Hans Rosling. is an extraordinary book. Bill Gates said it was the most important book to read in 2018. And what he says is that all the information exists. You've got to know where to find it, number one. And number two, you have to know what the information is telling you. And so I use a lot I kind of combine this qualitative trends analysis with then going to find data that supports it or refutes it if necessary. So as an example, one of the things that Factfulness talks about is that you must not look at the two opposite ends of a data spectrum. So let's look at inequality in South Africa. People say we're the most unequal society in the world. And they base that on the fact that the people at the bottom of the data spectrum are incredibly poor and the people at the top are incredibly rich. So they're taking two extremes of data. Okay. Now, what he says, and which is what I apply, is you can't look at data points on opposite ends. You've got to look at the gap and the spread.
Yeah.
So when you look at spread, do you get the same information? So that's, an example of then I would go and look at that and say, okay, for instance, formal housing is a very good indicator of income. If people live in shacks, and informal dwellings, they're obviously on a low end of the spectrum. So then SA General Household Surveys 2019 figures show 4% of households live in formal dwellings. That is a brick house or a block house with a corrugated iron or tile roof with electricity and with water. So that's then saying 80% of our households are living in a formal dwelling versus 12% live in informal dwelling, a shack or something like that. Yeah. Now, it is terrible that 12% of our society live in shacks.
Yeah.
But every time I do a presentation, I ask the audience. The other day, I asked the CEO of one of the biggest banks in this country, probably the biggest banks in Africa, said, what percentage of people live in shacks in South Africa? And he said 60%, maybe 45, 50% was his lowest guess. And I said, it's only 12%. Now, the problem is each time you fly into Cape Town, you fly over shacks, and then your assumption is that every township is the same. And while so this is the thing in terms of data, going back to your question and technology and stuff, is that the question is a lot of this data is there, but often we stray along media bias. Media tells us the story of a granny who lives in a shack with 12 children and is incredibly poor, and we extrapolate that story to say it represents the majority of the population. That's an anecdotal story. That is not data.
Yes.
And so what we do is that we're extrapolating these stories. And so a lot of what I do is then just look at the tech, looking at what data is available, what information is available, and then cross-reference that with my experience in the work I'm doing and in that space. And if something I experience is then confirmed by data, then of course it's a very, very high likelihood that it is accurate. And I think one of the other incredibly important things is really anticipating trends. Understanding, there was a saying, once you see a bandwagon, it's too late, and so a lot of, in terms of business opportunities as well, the question is not to say where are people now, what are people doing today and those kind of things. It's to say, well, what's the trend? Where's the movement moving to? And so that I can build a business that is going to be relevant in a year or 2 years' time. And not only relevant today and out of relevance in 2 years' time. And this includes shifting your business and being able to pivot, to adapt to what happens. And I think that's a really key part of it.
So, Gigi, this is a really weird question. You sound like a data scientist. So what is your two IT hacks, that productivity hacks that are your go-tos whenever you are behind your computer? Excel, it sounds like.
No, not at all. In fact, I'm so useless at kind of numbers and things like that until they come to understanding the dynamics of the space I operate in. So I do a lot of, as I said, I do a lot of reading, and there's a lot of people doing work in this space. So I kind of follow a lot of as an example, I mean, SA General Household Survey is an amazing tool. It's an annual tool by Stats South Africa. Our current stats that we have are from 2011.
Okay.
So how much has changed in that space. But SA General Household Survey is an annual survey, so that's a very powerful tool. And there's a number of people doing stuff in this space. There's quite a lot of GIS type stuff being done. There's a company, for instance, called Africa Scope that does geographic mapping and analysis of that mapping. But I mean, awesome. It's a kind of combination of stuff in terms of data and information. But my world is much more about a qualitative space, measuring what is happening rather than the quantitative data in quantitative research and that kind of story. I use it really as a kind of proof of my stuff.
Yes, so it's almost okay, I'm going to bounce that idea. Is there something there? What role do you, this is a big question, I don't even know if we've got time for it, I'm going to ask it anyway. What role do you think needs to be played by government versus citizens in this sector that you're talking around?
So the starting point is government is incredibly useless at making any difference in many spaces, and particularly in this one. So,
you can't say that.
And of course, the cross I bear is that I spend a lot of time being consulted by government, asking me to do presentations, give them advice for different kind of entities, whether it's like the National Youth Development guys or the IDC or the Jobs Fund and so on and so forth. And I give them lots of advice and suggestions, and they really never follow it. So that's why I say it's my cross to bear, but I do it for free, and I carry on doing it because I'd like to shape policy. Yeah. But to your point, I think the biggest thing is that all government should really do is enable this through legislation or municipal bylaws. And there's some well publicized stories of government, for instance, of Metro Police chasing a small business off the street because they don't abide by some stupid bylaw that was made 100 years ago.
But you've got to pause there. I mean, as a citizen, I want to be able to run down the road on the pavement, not in the road. You get these people, vendors that are selling stuff. I can't run there. Is it just because of my privilege? I don't understand what they're doing. And how do we get more people like me in Four Ways to understand just what's going on and why this is important?
So the crazy thing is that I went to America for the first time ever in 2019. And I drove my wife mad in New York because I kept stopping at each one of these hot dog stands and saying, amazing. How do you get permission to operate here? Yeah. Now, what is the difference between a hot dog stand in New York, which is seen as a feature of New York? Yeah. You've got to walk past and around these guys and T-shirt sellers and. You literally can't walk on a street in New York without bumping over a hot dog stand or whatever. And those guys are legally there.
Yeah,
I mean,
my dad used to work in Portugal in the street there as a vendor there.
There you go, and it's seen as a thing. But the one hot dog stand I was chatting to, the hot dog stand been in his family for 3 generations.
Yes,
it was a successful business. They had the rights to that piece of pavement. Yeah. It's seen as a tourist attraction, adds to the vibe. But in South Africa, God forbid, you have someone selling Boerewors rolls on the street of Johannesburg. The Metro Police will kick you off the street. Now, and try and get permission to do I'll take you. There was someone on 702 the other day who's got a food truck and wants to she's been waiting a year. She's been going and knocking on doors. Now the thing is, we have to change our mindset about what our country is. If we want to have leafy jacaranda trees and not a food truck or a hot dog stand in sight, well, that is not true of any modern city in the world, be it Amsterdam or London or New York or whatever it might be. So I think that there's a real role for these things that need to be in essence, legislated to be accepted. Governments around the world, for instance, are desperately trying to restrict and manage Airbnb, because they like, how does this thing work? Solar panels in South Africa, the municipality is trying to block people because their laws and their systems are archaic. And the same applies for the trade and the informal economy and so on, is that municipalities in particular have not adapted their bylaws and all of these things to whether it's a caravan on the side of the road selling the gordas or whatever it might be, to an Airbnb or to an Uber and so on and so forth. Now, charge them, tax them,
let them do their business.
But let them do their business, particularly if it's true, which is not true, but if it's true that there genuinely is 46% unemployment in South Africa, then why are we stopping people from having their own business? Otherwise, if we're stopping them from having their own business, there was a sandwich seller outside Standard Bank in Rosebank in 2020, who the Metro Police came and confiscated his stuff. And he was like, I make 20,000 Rand a month and I'm supporting my daughter from this business. And the Metro Police come and kick me off the street and confiscate my sandwiches. It's like, I mean, does that make any sense in a country where we do have an economic issue? And so this is the point I'm saying, is that government and municipalities need to adapt their business to enable businesses.
If they could just mow the lawn for us here, that would be outstanding. We're coming, Gigi, you've got so much, we could carry on for days because you inspire me in staying in South Africa and staying positive. But what's the tick to watch in this informal space? What should we be watching? And then just because you inspired me so much, I had a quarter for lunch yesterday in preparation for today. It was amazing. Don't tell my wife. It was amazing. So what's the tick to watch in this space?
So payment systems is going to be big, and everyone's trying something but not really getting it right. So that's literally either card acceptance, non-cash payments, and so on. And that's going to be operated off mobile. Interestingly, when we look at mobile, a lot of the growth of mobile is not going to be apps. It's going to be through Facebook and WhatsApp. Wow. So a lot of the opportunities is really about building apps like a WhatsApp app where you can order online, for instance. And I'm invested in a business called Yebo Fresh that does online. You order and you get you're a spaza shop. You order your stock on the WhatsApp platform, and it's delivered to you literally the next day, wherever you are in the township. That kind of online ordering and delivery is going to grow across every single spectrum, whether it's to spaza shops, to homes, and so on. But it's going to sit on top of Facebook and WhatsApp kind of platforms versus apps, primarily because data is a major cost in South Africa still. So people look for data light or data free platforms, and WhatsApp just is a really great platform. You can go onto it, you can type in peanut butter, and then it pops up on the one like for Yebo Fresh. It will say, right, here's the prices on this brand and this brand of peanut butter. You can order it and send your PIN location of where you live or you trade, and they get it on the other side and they send it to you to that PIN location. So this kind of WhatsApp built platforms, Facebook, to where you kind of advertise your stuff, and then you click on the WhatsApp button to get it then delivered. Those kind of platforms are going to be very powerful, and that's certainly the future.
And you mentioned data free there. So if any big businesses are listening, if you got your data free SMS platforms, that's a good play in there, because you don't want to punish your customers for using your application.
Data light and data free is absolutely is a really big play. So yeah, I think, and it's also about interfaces. So, kind of linking your Facebook to your WhatsApp, to your app, to your website, and so on. It's how do you integrate those platforms, because people are familiar. Smartphone penetration is more than 100%. And you can get an Android phone now for 299 Rand from MTN. It's a really nice phone, and it comes preloaded with Facebook Lite, which is a form of Facebook that's low on data, Facebook Lite and WhatsApp. And so people are using that, and then you want to put business opportunities on top of that kind of platform.
Sure. Gigi, from a Casinomics perspective, SADC, I think we've spoken about that in offline before. What about crossing continents, going to South America, Paraguay, Peru, Ecuador, or going north into Asia and those areas? Can Africa teach them anything?
Look, I think that the similarities in call it semi-formal markets, whether it's in Asia or India and Africa, the similarities are remarkably similar in terms of how people resolve certain pain points that they may have in terms of how they trade, how they live, and so on. So there's it's very easy to with some small adaptation, apply a model in one space into another space. And in Gastronomic Revolution, I wrote about various businesses throughout Africa that have just been quite extraordinary. One of them is called Hello Pesa. Another one is the Tolerum Group in Nigeria, and so on. And these are businesses that have actually done that. They've understood informal markets and then built either businesses across the continent or been able to apply their businesses also in places like India and Bangladesh and so on and so forth. So I'm not, but I don't think it's a one way. It's not about us exporting it. I think you see there's a lot of kind of movement in both directions. But yes, there's certainly a lot. It's more about, rather than exporting or importing, there's a lot of applying these case studies, these examples, these ways of doing business, applying them in markets that have very similar dynamics.
So perhaps teaching the corporate how to do it to do it better when they go is somewhere where people should be chatting to these guys who are growing out of this area. So what is Minanawe's goal for 2022? I've got two more questions for you. So that's the first one. Where are you going for this year?
Yeah, so I'm invested in a few businesses. It's this Yebo Fresh, this online one, a traditional herbal muti business that is producing a range of premium bottled products, a range of sauces and. So my kind of thing is really about, that's where I'm excited and where I find real excitement. I'm looking at building in the process of trying to build a credit platform to give credit to small businesses, to help them grow their businesses and so on. So so my kind of objective is really driving those businesses. And I said to someone the other day, I was like, I'm putting a lot of money and time into these businesses, and I'll probably never get the money back, and I might lose a lot of money. But hell, I'll have such great content for my next book.
Exactly. It's all about the content, man.
So I'll either be able to say, look, this is how it's done.
Or
wow,
Or you're going to look
do
at
it this way.
Exactly. You're going to look at your daughter and say, honey, varsity, you're going to have to pay your own way. Yeah, no, we get that one.
Exactly. So that's really, so I do a lot of consulting, but the area of excitement and where I really am enjoying focusing is on building these businesses from startups into something bigger.
Outstanding. If you had a billboard across the N1 that's headed for Bank City, what would it say?
Sure. It would probably talk to optimism about our country. It would be like, lift your chin, things are better than they appear to be. And funnily enough, the subtitle of the book, Factfulness, is why the world is getting better and how to find out about this. And I believe that so much that, South Africa is actually in a far better place than anyone is giving it credit for. And instead of doomsday scrolling through our news and media stuff, actually, we should be more positive. So, and I stole this from a business colleague of mine, but his mantra, which I then have adopted, is about passion-fueled optimism. And that would be my billboard, would be about, you need more passion-fueled optimism. And I said the same to these kids. I said, guys, you need to have passion about something. I don't care what it is. You need to have a passion, and it could be a sport, it could be a hobby, it could be a job. My passion is really about the fact that let's just look at this country differently, and we can change it.
Oh, thank you, Gigi. Thank you. I needed that on today, and I needed that reminder that we live in the most beautiful country in the world with the most opportunity, and life rocks if you let it. If you choose to be positive, it's going to be brilliant. So from my side, Daniel Robus, I want to thank you, Gigi, for giving us time. I want to wish you and your family just peace and joy during this matric year. I know how much stress it is. I've got a grade 11 of my own. I hope that everything goes well. A credit platform, sources, Muti, I can't wait to see it in the spa in Fourways Gardens. And may our paths cross very soon. Thank you for your time and have an amazing day.
Thank you.